You know that feeling when you're trying to fall asleep and your mind suddenly pulls you back into a conversation you had earlier that day. Or maybe it was last week, or even last month. You're lying there in the dark, and your brain decides this is the perfect time to replay every word, every pause, every facial expression. You analyze the tone second, guess your responses, and wonder what the other person really meant by that one particular comment. And the more you try to stop thinking about it, the more your mind seems determined to dissect every detail. If this sounds familiar, I want you to know something important right now. You're not losing your mind. You're not being irrational or overly sensitive. What's happening is actually your brain doing exactly what it's designed to do. Your mind is searching for something it desperately needs: closure. And it won't stop replaying that conversation until it gets it, or until you learn how to give it permission to let go. This is one of those psychological patterns that almost everyone experiences, but very few people truly understand. We tend to judge ourselves harshly for it. We call ourselves overthinkers, tell ourselves we're being ridiculous, or wonder why we can't just move on like everyone else seems to. But here's the truth: replaying conversations isn't a character flaw. It's a feature of human psychology, rooted in how our brains process social interactions and seek resolution. Let me take you deeper into what's really happening in your mind during these moments. Every day, you have countless interactions with people. Most of them are straightforward and complete. You ask someone how they're doing, they respond, you exchange a few pleasantries, and that's it. Your brain processes these interactions, files them away as resolved, and moves on. But then there are those other conversations, the ones that leave you with questions, confusion, discomfort, or a nagging sense that something wasn't quite right. These are the conversations your brain flags as incomplete. Think about the last conversation you couldn't stop replaying. What made it stick in your mind? Was it something someone said that felt ambiguous or loaded with hidden meaning? Was it something you said that came out wrong? Was it an interaction that ended abruptly before you felt ready? Maybe someone's reaction didn't match what you expected, or perhaps their words said one thing, but their body language said something completely different. Whatever it was, your brain identified it as unfinished business. And here's where the psychology gets really interesting. The human mind has a powerful drive to complete incomplete things. Psychologists call this the Zeigarnik Effect, named after Bluma Zeigarnik, a researcher who discovered that people remember uncompleted tasks better than completed ones. She noticed that waiters in a restaurant could recall detailed orders that were still in progress. But once those orders were delivered and paid for, the information vanished from their memory. The incomplete tasks stayed active in their minds, while the completed ones were released. Your brain treats conversations and social interactions the same way. When an interaction feels complete, when you've said what you needed to say, understood what the other person meant, and reached some kind of resolution, your brain files it away and moves on. But when something feels unfinished, unclear, unresolved, your mind keeps that file open. It stays active in your working memory, popping up at random moments, demanding your attention. Now, you might be wondering why your brain cares so much about social interactions in the first place. Why does an ambiguous comment from a coworker bother you for 3 days? Why does one awkward exchange at a party replay in your mind all week? The answer goes back to our evolutionary history. For our ancestors, being part of a social group wasn't just nice to have. It was essential for survival. If you were cast out from your tribe, your chances of surviving on your own were extremely low. You needed the group for protection, resources, shared knowledge, and reproduction. So our brains evolved to be incredibly sensitive to social cues and intensely motivated to maintain good relationships with others. This is why rejection hurts so much, why we feel embarrassed when we make social mistakes, and why we obsessively analyze interactions that might indicate someone is upset with us or thinking poorly of us. Your brain is running an ancient program designed to keep you socially connected and accepted, because in the environment where humans evolved, social exclusion could literally be a death sentence. The problem is that this ancient alarm system doesn't always calibrate well to modern life. That slightly weird tone in your friend's text message, your brain treats it like a potential threat to your survival. That awkward thing you said at lunch, your mind replays it as if your entire social standing is at risk. The reality is that most of these interactions don't carry anywhere near the consequences your brain thinks they do, but your emotional system doesn't always know the difference. So here you are, lying awake at night, replaying a conversation that probably didn't mean nearly as much to the other person as it means to you. And your brain is convinced that if you just analyze it one more time, you'll finally figure it out, finally understand what happened, finally achieve that sense of resolution. But here's what most people don't realize. The closure your brain is seeking doesn't always have to come from the other person or from finally figuring out what they meant. Sometimes, actually, most of the time, closure is something you create for yourself. Let me explain what I mean by breaking down the different types of conversational replay and what your brain is actually seeking in each case. When you're trying to decode what someone really meant, this is probably the most common type of replay. Someone said something ambiguous, contradictory, or loaded, and now you're trying to figure out what they actually meant. Maybe your boss said, "We should talk about your project soon," with no further context. Maybe your partner said, "I'm fine," but their tone suggested they were anything but fine. Maybe a friend made a comment that could be interpreted multiple ways, and you're not sure if it was a compliment, criticism, or something in between. In these situations, your brain is seeking clarity and certainty. You're replaying the conversation, trying to gather more clues. The exact words they used, their facial expression. What was happening right before they said it? What happened right after? You're essentially trying to be a detective, piecing together evidence to solve the mystery of what they really meant. Here's the first thing you need to understand. Human communication is inherently ambiguous. We speak in hints and implications. We say things we don't mean and don't say things we do mean. We're influenced by our moods, our contexts, our past experiences. The same sentence can mean completely different things depending on who's saying it, how they're saying it, and what happened 5 minutes before they said it. So when you're replaying a conversation, trying to decode hidden meanings, you're often dealing with genuinely ambiguous information. Your brain wants certainty, but the reality is that sometimes there simply isn't enough information to be certain. You can analyze that interaction 1,000 times, and you still won't know for sure what they meant unless you ask them directly or let it play out over time. This is where you have to practice something that's incredibly difficult but incredibly valuable: accepting ambiguity. I know that's not what your brain wants to hear. Your brain wants answers, wants clarity, wants to close the loop. But sometimes the most adaptive response is to acknowledge that you don't know, that you can't know based on the information you have, and that you're going to be okay with that uncertainty. This doesn't mean you don't care or that you're being dismissive of your own concerns. It means you're choosing not to let ambiguity hijack your mental energy. You can notice the uncertainty. I'm not sure what my boss meant by that comment, without spiraling into endless speculation about all the possible meanings. You can also test your interpretations. Ask yourself, based on this person's past behavior and our relationship history, what's the most likely explanation? If your boss has generally been supportive and clear when there's a problem, the most likely scenario is that this is a routine conversation, or even a positive one. Your anxious brain might be generating catastrophic interpretations, but that doesn't make them accurate or probable. And here's something else to consider. Sometimes the most direct path to closure is simply asking for clarification. I know this feels vulnerable. It requires admitting that you're confused, or that something bothered you enough that you're still thinking about it. But consider the alternative, replaying the conversation for days or weeks, letting your anxiety build, making assumptions that might be completely wrong. A simple, direct question can often end the replay immediately. Hey, when you said we needed to talk about my project, I wanted to check in. Is there something specific you're concerned about? Or is this just a routine check-in? Most of the time, the person will clarify immediately, and you'll realize you were worrying about nothing. Even if there is something to discuss, you've replaced ambiguity with clarity, which is exactly what your brain was seeking. When you're cringing at your own words. Now let's talk about a different type of replay. When you're the one who said something you regret, something awkward, something that didn't come out the way you intended. This is the type where you physically cringe when the memory hits you. Maybe you told a joke that landed poorly. Maybe you overshared something personal. Maybe you got defensive in a discussion and said something harsher than you meant. In these situations, you're not trying to decode someone else's meaning. You're replaying your own behavior and judging yourself for it. What your brain is seeking here is actually reconciliation between your self-image and your behavior. You want to see yourself as socially competent, kind, articulate, and appropriate. But in that moment, you behaved in a way that contradicts that self-image, and your mind is struggling to reconcile the gap. This type of mental replay is actually a form of self-punishment. You're putting yourself on trial in the courtroom of your own mind, and you're simultaneously the prosecutor, the judge, and the defendant. You replay the moment, examine it from every angle, and deliver guilty verdicts over and over. Here's what you need to understand. Everyone has conversational moments they wish they could take back. Everyone has said things that didn't land right. Everyone has had interactions where they weren't their best self. The difference between people who move on quickly and people who torture themselves with these replays for days or weeks isn't that some people never make mistakes. It's that some people extend themselves compassion while others don't. When you catch yourself in this type of replay, try this perspective shift. Imagine your best friend came to you describing the exact same situation. They told you they made the same comment you made, had the same awkward moment. Would you judge them as harshly as you're judging yourself? Would you tell them they're a terrible person, that everyone now thinks poorly of them, that this one moment defines their character? Of course not. You'd probably say something like, "Don't worry about it, everyone has moments like that." Or, "I'm sure they didn't think much of it." Or, "You're being way too hard on yourself. So why are you holding yourself to a standard of perfection that you would never hold anyone else to?" The closure you need in these situations isn't to go back and change what you said. You can't do that. The closure comes from self-forgiveness. from accepting that you're human, and that humans have imperfect moments. It comes from recognizing that one awkward comment doesn't erase all the times you've been thoughtful, kind, and appropriate. It comes from understanding that most people are too focused on their own concerns to spend much time analyzing your conversational missteps. And here's something else that cringe you feel when replaying an awkward moment. That's actually a sign of growth. It means your social awareness has developed since that moment. You're able to see what you couldn't see in the moment. That's not something to beat yourself up over. It's evidence that you're learning and evolving. But there's also a practical lesson to extract from these replays. Instead of just beating yourself up, ask yourself, what can I learn from this interaction? Maybe you learn that you want to pause before responding when you feel defensive. Maybe you learn that certain topics are better saved for closer friends rather than casual acquaintances. Maybe you learn that you need to check in with yourself about your emotional state before having important conversations. Once you've identified the lesson, you've completed the learning cycle. You've extracted the value from the experience. Now you can consciously choose to release the replay. You can literally say to yourself, I've learned from this. I don't need to keep punishing myself. Next time I'll handle it differently. When you're trying to understand someone else's behavior, here's another common scenario. Someone behaved in a way that hurt you, confused you, or didn't make sense. And now you're replaying the interaction, trying to understand why they did what they did. Maybe someone you thought was a friend was cold to you out of nowhere. Maybe someone made a cutting remark and then acted like nothing happened. Maybe someone you care about suddenly pulled away and won't explain why. In these situations, your brain is trying to create a coherent narrative. Humans are storytelling creatures. We need things to make sense. We need cause and effect. We need to understand why people do what they do, especially when their behavior affects us emotionally. When someone's behavior seems random, contradictory, or hurtful, our brains go into overdrive trying to find the explanation. You replay the conversation looking for clues. You analyze every word, every pause, every shift in body language. You try to remember exactly what happened right before their behavior changed. You run through every possible explanation. Did I offend them without realizing it? Are they upset with me? Are they dealing with something in their own life? Do they not actually like me as much as I thought? Here's the difficult truth that I need you to hear. Sometimes you'll never know why someone behaved the way they did. Sometimes people's behavior has absolutely nothing to do with you, and everything to do with their own internal struggles, insecurities, bad day, or unresolved issues. Sometimes people are just poor communicators. Sometimes they're emotionally reactive. Sometimes they project their own problems onto others. And sometimes people are dealing with things you can't see and won't tell you about. The closure you're seeking, a complete understanding of why someone did what they did, might simply not be accessible to you. And this is deeply uncomfortable, because it means you're left with an incomplete story, an unfinished narrative. Your brain hates this. It will keep trying to write the ending, to fill in the blanks, to make sense of the senseless. But here's an alternative form of closure you can create for yourself. You can decide that you don't need to understand everything in order to move forward. This doesn't mean you don't care or that the interaction doesn't matter. It means you're choosing to release your grip on the need for a complete explanation. You can create closure by accepting that some people's behavior will remain a mystery, and that's okay. You can acknowledge that something confusing or hurtful happened, that you don't fully understand it, and that you're going to be okay anyway. You can decide how you want to respond to their behavior without necessarily understanding the full psychology behind it. You can also create closure through boundaries. If someone's behavior consistently leaves you confused, hurt, or uncomfortable, you don't need to understand their motivations to protect yourself. You can decide how much emotional energy you want to invest in that relationship, how much access you want to give them to your inner world, and what behavior you're willing to accept going forward. When you realize you need to make amends, now let's talk about something that might be even more uncomfortable. What happens when you replay a conversation and realize that you were wrong, that you hurt someone, or that you owe someone an apology? This type of replay is your conscience at work. It's your internal moral compass telling you that something you did violated your own values or damaged a relationship you care about. The closure your brain is seeking here isn't just self-forgiveness, it's reconciliation, and the replaying won't stop until you address it. Your brain is essentially keeping this file open, sending you reminder after reminder that there's unfinished business. It's like having an important email in your inbox that you keep marking as unread because you're not ready to deal with it. But it never goes away. It just keeps popping up, demanding your attention, creating mental clutter. The only way to close this particular file is to take action. If you owe someone an apology, give it. Not a defensive apology filled with excuses and justifications, but a genuine one that acknowledges the impact of your actions without centering yourself. Here's what a real apology sounds like. I've been thinking about our conversation, and I realize I was dismissive of your feelings. That wasn't okay, and I'm sorry. That's it. Clean, clear, genuine. But I was stressed. Or, but you also did this thing. Or, I'm sorry you felt that way. Just acknowledgement, responsibility, and genuine remorse. I know apologizing can feel terrifying. It makes you vulnerable. It requires admitting you were wrong. Some people avoid apologizing because they're afraid it will make the situation worse, or because they don't want to bring up something the other person might have already moved past. But here's the thing. If your brain is still replaying it, if you're still feeling guilty about it, it's not resolved for you. And chances are, it's not fully resolved for them either. A genuine apology almost always brings relief to both people. It brings closure. It acknowledges reality instead of pretending everything is fine when it isn't. It repairs connection instead of letting resentment or guilt quietly erode the relationship. And if you're worried about bringing up old issues, consider this. Carrying unaddressed guilt is heavier than having a brief, uncomfortable conversation. The conversation might be awkward for 5 minutes. The guilt will weigh on you for weeks, months, or even years if you don't address it. The difference between productive reflection and destructive rumination. Now, here's something really important that I need you to understand. Not all mental replay is the same. There's a crucial difference between productive reflection and destructive rumination. And learning to tell them apart can completely change your relationship with your own thoughts. Productive reflection is when you're replaying a conversation with the genuine intention of learning from it. You're asking yourself questions like, what can I do differently next time? What does this reveal about my communication patterns? How can I express myself more clearly in the future? This type of reflection has a purpose and an endpoint. Once you've extracted the lesson, you can move on. Destructive rumination, on the other hand, is when you're replaying the conversation in endless loops without any movement toward resolution or learning. You're not asking productive questions. You're just rehashing the same thoughts over and over, usually accompanied by harsh self-judgment or spiraling anxiety. This is the kind where you replay the conversation 50 times and end up in the exact same place emotionally that you started. The key difference is this productive reflection moves you forward. Rumination keeps you stuck. So how do you tell which one you're doing? Ask yourself these questions. Am I learning anything new from this replay, or am I just going over the same ground again? Am I moving toward a resolution or action, or am I just spinning my wheels? Am I approaching this with curiosity and self-compassion, or with judgment and anxiety? If you realize you've crossed from reflection into rumination, you need to actively interrupt the pattern. This isn't about suppressing your thoughts or pretending you're not bothered. It's about recognizing when your mental replay has stopped being useful and started being harmful. Practical techniques to stop the replay cycle. Let me give you some concrete strategies for when you catch yourself in one of these mental replay loops. First, try the thought record technique. Instead of just letting the conversation replay in your mind like a movie, actually write it down. Write out what happened, what was said, how you felt, and what you're worried about. There's something about externalizing your thoughts that helps your brain let go of them. It's like you're telling your mind, I've documented this. We don't need to keep holding onto it in our working memory. When you write it down, you might also notice patterns you couldn't see while the thoughts were just swirling around in your head. You might realize you're making assumptions that aren't based on evidence. You might see that you're catastrophizing, taking one awkward moment and turning it into a story about how everyone hates you and your life is falling apart. Second, practice thought labeling. When you notice yourself starting to replay a conversation, simply label what's happening. I'm replaying the conversation with Sarah again. Don't judge it. Don't try to stop it forcefully. Just notice it and name it. This creates a little bit of psychological distance between you and the thought. You're no longer completely identified with the replay. You're observing it happening. This might sound too simple to be effective, but there's solid psychological research behind it. When you label your thoughts and emotions, you activate the prefrontal cortex, the reasoning part of your brain, which helps regulate the emotional centers that are driving the replay. It's a way of moving from being swept away by the thought to being the observer of the thought. Third, set a worry time. This sounds counterintuitive, but it actually works. If you find yourself replaying conversations throughout the day, designate a specific 15-minute period as your official worry time or replay time. When the thoughts come up at other times, tell yourself, I'll think about this during my designated time at 7 p.m. Then, when 7 p.m. comes, you can spend that 15 minutes really thinking it through, if you still need to. What often happens is that by the time your designated worry time arrives, the urgency has faded, or you realize the thought has already resolved itself, or you spend 5 minutes thinking about it and realize you've exhausted everything useful there is to think about it. This technique helps contain the rumination instead of letting it bleed into your entire day. Fourth, use the so what technique. When you're replaying a conversation and spiraling into worst-case scenarios, keep asking yourself, so what? Until you get to the core fear. I said something awkward at the meeting. So what? People might think I'm incompetent. So what? They might not respect me. So what? I might not get promoted. So what? Not be successful. So what? I might not be valuable or worthy. Ah, there it is. The core fear. Often when we're replaying conversations obsessively, we're not really worried about the conversation itself. We're worried about what it might mean about our worth, our lovability, our belonging. When you identify the core fear, you can address it directly instead of staying stuck in the surface level worry, understanding why certain conversations stick more than others. Here's something fascinating. Not everyone replays the same types of conversations. The interactions that stick in your mind reveal something important about your personal psychology, your past experiences, and your attachment patterns. If you tend to replay conversations where you think you might have disappointed someone or failed to meet their expectations, you might have patterns related to perfectionism or people-pleasing. Maybe you learned early in life that your worth was tied to your performance or to making others happy. So now, any interaction where you might have fallen short triggers this ancient anxiety about not being good enough. If you replay conversations where someone seemed distant or cold, constantly analyzing whether they're upset with you or pulling away, you might have an anxious attachment style. This often develops when early relationships were inconsistent. Sometimes people were there for you, sometimes they weren't, and you never knew which version you'd get. So now you're hypervigilant to any sign that someone might be withdrawing, and ambiguous interactions send you into overdrive. If you tend to replay conversations where you were vulnerable or shared something personal, and now you're worried you revealed too much, you might be dealing with shame or a fear of being truly seen. Maybe past experiences taught you that showing your real self leads to rejection or judgment. So now, every time you let your guard down, your brain panics and tries to assess the damage. Understanding these patterns doesn't make the replaying stop immediately, but it does give you insight into what's really driving it. You're not just overthinking a conversation. You're responding to old wounds, old fears, old stories about yourself and relationships. And here's the powerful part. Once you understand the pattern, you can start responding to it differently. Instead of just being confused about why you can't stop thinking about a simple interaction, you can recognize, oh, this is my old fear of abandonment being triggered. This person's ambiguous text message tapped into my anxiety about people leaving. The intensity of my reaction isn't really about this text. It's about all the times in the past when distance meant loss. When you can see the pattern, you can start to separate the past from the present. You can ask yourself, is there actual evidence in this current situation that I need to worry, or am I responding to old fears? Often, you'll realize that the present situation is actually fine. It's just triggering old emotional memories. How past trauma shows up in conversational replay. I want to be careful here, because I'm not talking about diagnosing or treating trauma. If you've experienced significant trauma, working with a qualified therapist is important. But I do want to acknowledge that past painful experiences can make conversational replay much more intense and persistent. If you've been through experiences where your words were used against you, where you were gaslit or manipulated, where conflict escalated into something frightening, or where miscommunication led to serious consequences, your nervous system learned to be hypervigilant about social interactions. It makes complete sense that you would replay conversations obsessively. Your brain is trying to protect you from past harm happening again. In these cases, the replay isn't just about seeking closure on this particular conversation. It's about trying to ensure safety. Your brain is essentially saying, we need to analyze every detail of this interaction to make sure we're not in danger, to make sure we didn't miss a warning sign, to make sure we can predict what's coming next. If you recognize yourself in this description, please know that this level of hypervigilance made sense given what you experienced. Your brain developed this pattern to protect you. But it might not be serving you well anymore, especially if you're now in relationships and environments that are actually safe. Healing from this kind of pattern usually requires more than just logic or willpower. It requires working with your nervous system, building new experiences of safety, and often getting support from someone trained in trauma-informed approaches. But recognizing that your conversational replay might be connected to past experiences is an important first step, creating closure. A practical framework. Let me give you a concrete framework for creating closure when you find yourself stuck replaying a conversation. Step 1. Identify what type of closure you're seeking. Are you seeking clarity about what someone meant? Are you seeking self-forgiveness? Are you seeking understanding of someone's behavior? Are you seeking resolution of guilt? Be specific about what would actually feel like closure to you. Step 2. Determine whether that closure is accessible. Can you get clarity by asking the person directly? Can you create self-forgiveness through self-compassion? Is understanding someone's behavior actually possible? Or are you seeking something you'll never have access to? Step 3. If the closure is accessible, take action to get it. Have the conversation. Make the apology. Ask for clarification. Don't wait for the perfect moment or the perfect words. Just take the step. Step 4. If the closure isn't accessible, if you can't know what someone really meant, if you can't change the past, if someone won't give you the explanation you want, you have to create closure internally. This is where you practice acceptance. You acknowledge what happened, acknowledge that it's incomplete or unresolved, and consciously choose to move forward anyway. This might sound like, I'm not going to understand why my friend acted that way, and I'm choosing to be okay with that uncertainty. I can't control their behavior or their explanations. I can only control how much mental energy I give to trying to figure it out. Or, I said something I regret and I can't take it back. I've learned from it. I'm choosing to forgive myself and do better next time rather than punish myself indefinitely. Or, that conversation ended badly and I don't have the opportunity to revisit it. I'm choosing to accept that some things in life don't get tied up neatly, and that's part of being human. The permission to let go. Here's something I really want you to understand. Your brain is waiting for permission. It's waiting for you to say, it's okay to let this go now. We've thought about it enough. We've learned what we can learn. It's time to release it. Sometimes we hold on to conversational replays because we believe that if we stop thinking about it, we're being careless or irresponsible. We think that constantly analyzing it means we're taking it seriously, that we care about doing better, that we're being conscientious. But there's a point where continued analysis isn't conscientiousness. It's just self-punishment or anxiety. You can care about something without thinking about it constantly. You can take something seriously without replaying it endlessly. You can learn from an interaction without torturing yourself with it. So I'm giving you permission right now. And more importantly, you need to give yourself permission to let go of the conversations that are taking up residence in your mind. You don't need to understand everything. You don't need to have said the perfect thing. You don't need to have complete certainty about what someone else was thinking or feeling. You can acknowledge that something bothered you or confused you. Extract whatever lesson or insight is available, and then consciously choose to release it. You can say to your brain, thank you for trying to protect me and help me learn. I've got it now. We can let this go, moving forward. Your actionable takeaway. So here's what I want you to do the next time you catch yourself Replaying a conversation in your mind, first pause and ask yourself, what kind of closure am I seeking right now? Be honest and specific. Don't just say, I don't know. Really identify what your brain is searching for. Second, ask yourself, can I get this closure, or do I need to create it for myself? If you can get it through direct communication or action, commit to doing that. If you can't get it from an external source, acknowledge that and commit to creating internal closure. Third, extract the lesson if there is one. Ask yourself, what can I learn from this interaction that will help me going forward? Once you've identified the lesson, you've completed the productive part of the reflection. Fourth, consciously choose to release the replay. You can literally say out loud or in your mind, I'm choosing to let this go now. I've thought about it enough. It's time to move forward. And then, when your mind tries to pull you back into the replay, because it will, gently redirect yourself. I've already processed this. I don't need to think about it anymore. This isn't a one-time fix. You might need to redirect yourself dozens of times, but each time you do, you're training your brain that this particular loop is no longer necessary. You're teaching yourself that you can survive without complete understanding, without perfect closure, without endless analysis. And finally, practice self-compassion. You're not broken for replaying conversations. You're not weak or overly sensitive or irrational. You're human, with a human brain that's trying to navigate the incredibly complex world of social relationships. Some days you'll manage the replays better than others, and that's okay. The goal isn't to never replay conversations again. Sometimes reflection is valuable and necessary. The goal is to be able to distinguish between useful reflection and harmful rumination, and to give yourself the closure your brain is seeking, whether that comes from external resolution or internal acceptance. You have more control over this than you think. Your brain is powerful, but you can learn to work with it instead of being at its mercy. You can learn to recognize when it's trying to help you and when it's just spinning its wheels. You can learn to give it what it needs, closure, in ways that actually serve your well-being rather than just feeding the anxiety loop. So the next time you're lying awake replaying that conversation, remember your brain isn't broken. It's seeking closure, and now you know how to give it exactly what it needs.